You were dutiful in your instructions. You have your finger right at Genesis 34 and you're ready to read. Amen? All right, let's stand for the reading of the word. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and he lay with her and raped her. But he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl, this young woman as a wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob said nothing until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard about it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a very disgraceful thing in Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage, and intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. So you will live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your sight, and I will give whatever you tell me. Demand of me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give whatever you tell me. But give the girl in marriage." But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, give our sister to a man who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us, and that every male of you will be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go." Now, their words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do this, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now, he was more respectful than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the people of their city, saying, "These men are friendly to us. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. We will take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will these men consent to us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised just as they are circumcised. Will their livestock and their property and all their animals not be ours? Let's just consent to them, and they will live with us." All who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. May the Lord bless our reading. You may be seated. That's where we have to stop today. The passage actually goes to 35:8 because we see God's activity in there. Tell you kind of how I feel. Years ago, when my oldest daughter, Illy, who's in the room, and I'm going to embarrass her, was about 3 or 4 years old, I took her to Academy. It's a sports and outdoor store in Houston, and I bought her the cutting edge of technology, right? A Disney princess fishing pole, right? And after work, me and my buddies would go to Kemah under the causeway, and we'd sit at the bank. And one of my buddies had a dog, a little blue heeler, and those dogs are very intelligent. And so we baited Illy's hook in her, 2-foot-long princess plastic fishing pole, and we baited it. And I showed her how to cast, and she cast into the water. And then she put the pole down between 2 rocks so it wouldn't get away. And she just spent the rest of her time playing with this little dog. Well, we were serious. We were fishing. We weren't catching, we were fishing, because it's called fishing, not catching. And about 20 minutes go by, and I hear a ruckus behind me, and I turn and look, and she's going crazy. I got a fish. She's the only one that caught something that day. So we take her cutting edge, very expensive, 2-foot fishing pole, Disney princesses on it, and we reel in the ugliest, slimy, dark brown dogfish. That's what we called it. And the moment that thing came out of the water, she starts yelling, "Put him back, put him back. He can't breathe. Put him back, put him back." So I'm trying to grab the fishing line and take a hold of this grotesque thing, and it's slippery in my hands, and I can't get a handle on it. Finally, I take that fishing pole and I hit the lever and cast it back in the water, and he came off the hook somehow, got free, and I reeled it back in, and everything was as it should be. And you say to me, why do you tell us that story? Dearly beloved, that fish represents how I feel about this text. It's slippery. It's hard to get your hands around it. It's hard to know who's the villain exactly and who's acting righteously. It's hard to know, was this really a rape or was this just, someone who ran game on a naive girl? There's some commentators and there's scholarly literature out there that really don't think she was raped. There's others that say, are you crazy? Of course she was raped. There's others that say, look, Jacob is acting with wisdom. He's calm. He's waiting. And there's others that say, are you kidding? He's mentioned 11 times and says nothing. And when he does speak, he says something so foolhardy, you can't even imagine it's him. It's slippery. It's hard to get our hands around this text. He just comes off of the heels of a peaceful existence with his brother who wanted to kill him for 20 years, at least in his mind. He just comes out of a 20-year oppression with his uncle Laban and his larceny, stealing from him, changing his wages 10 times, lying to him, and then becoming unfavorably to him. His feigning friendship is gone. Now his face is what he really feels about Jacob. You're a thief. You stole my wealth from me. And he pursues him hotly on horses with swords ready to kill him. And Jacob wrestles with God and finds acceptance with God and gets his hip dislocated. Now he can't turn back and fight Laban. He has to face him. But God intervenes and shows up to Laban and tells him, don't touch Jacob. And he gets this bright idea. I have an idea. We're going to put some people in jeopardy because we know we're headed towards Esau, my brother, who for the last 20 years I perceived wanted to kill me. So I'm going to separate the companies, and I'm going to put these people in danger and these people over here. And if he kills one of them, at least this one will live. So he goes to do that. And he sends these companies of animals and flocks to Esau in stages to hopefully calm him down so that his anger wouldn't burn against him after 20 years for what he had done to him, stealing his birthright and then stealing the blessing through trickery. All those 2 decades before. And then what happens? Jacob finds acceptance with God. And then he finds acceptance with his brother. And he says to his brother, seeing you is like seeing the face of God. In chapter 33, verses 16 through 17, we read this. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Succoth. The implication is that during this gap of time, the brothers lived near each other and experienced a peaceful existence. They were probably catching up on war stories, Esau with his exploits and Jacob with his oppression under Laban. Later the narrator will give us Esau's perspective. In chapter 36, we'll read about Esau. It says, then Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all his household and his livestock and all his cattle and all his goods which he had acquired in the land of Canaan and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. And then here's the reason why. For their property had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they sojourned could not sustain them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. Esau was rich. Jacob was rich. They were living close to each other. Whatever Jacob had was going to go to Jacob since he obtained the birthright and the blessing from his father. Jacob came back from Laban extremely heavy, extremely kavod, the Hebrew word for rich. He gave Esau a huge gift of hundreds of animals. They hung out together. There is this serene picture, life on the range, animals, workers, feasts, probably wine on Sunday evening after Awana. The two brothers sitting on the porch of a tent, enjoying fellowship, but like Lot and Abraham, their flocks grew too numerous. The blessing was overflowing. Whomever is connected to the seed bearer, Jacob, and whomever blesses the seed bearer will be blessed. And we see Esau indeed becoming blessed, so much so that he had to move away because their wealth was too great to stay close to each other. And we ended the last episode on a wonderful statement of peace. At the end of Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road, there's a paragraph that doesn't make sense without interpretation. The story is about a post-apocalyptic world. The boy and his dad traverse the fallen world with death and destruction all around them. The majority of the world's population has died. His dad is sick, coughing up blood, getting weaker by the day. They find sustenance at opportune times in the story, often barely in the nick of time. And you want them to stay put in the safety of the hold of that ship they found full of food, or in the cellar that they found on that property full of food. But in each instance, they have to keep moving. Marauders, murderers, people doing unthinkable things are gunning for them. At the end, after his dad dies, the little boy is left alone. He survives a bit, but one day he comes across a man with a gun, dressed differently, a survivalist. His wife is with him, and they offer the boy refuge. Then the story ends. It ends with the following paragraph, quote, "Once there were brook trouts in the streams in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world and its becoming, maps and mazes of a thing which could not be put back, not made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery," end quote. This paragraph ends the book, and it requires interpretation. Undoubtedly, English majors write master's theses on paragraphs like this one. The point, though, through literary criticism, is that this paragraph ends the book in the height of optimism. The boy survived. He kept the fire that his dad told him he had, the one in his heart, that fire, that moral compass that tells men how they are to be civilized, loving, brave. He has done that. He is doing that. And when the reader longs for more, the story has ended, and the next page is the back cover of the book, and the reader is there left pondering at the even deeper level what he has read. This is how the ending of Jacob and Esau's reunion ends in Genesis 33, verses 16 through 17. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built for himself a house and made booths for his livestock there in the place there. Therefore, the place is named Succoth. That paragraph makes us think of a peaceful ending to a harsh 20 years for Esau and Jacob. A serene lake, a glen with beautiful trees swaying in the gentle breeze. All is lovely, dearly beloved. All is as it should be. Later, after that short but powerful interlude, Jacob would move on into the land of Canaan, and he would land there, quote, safely. That is, in the Hebrew, shalom, peace, unharmed, aside from the dislocated hip. He is not battle-tested, not scarred from the sharp and biting steel of war, not maimed from the ragged edge of a steel sword. No, shalom is his condition. Safely, peacefully, he arrived in Shechem. He is heavy, very rich, able to make a statement by his very presence. Low in number as to how many men he has, but rich in livestock, rich in children, rich in money, industrious. Oh, Jacob has just experienced beauty and wonder of anger washed under a bridge and the reunion with family of long ago. He buys land from Hamor, Shechem's father, the very land his tent is pitched on. When he arrived and camped outside the city, he planted a flag. In a sense, that was what he did, planted a flag. How? By building an altar to Yahweh. And he named the altar El, Elohi Israel, God, the God of Israel. He worships. Altars are for animal sacrifice, and the implication is that Jacob has got it. He wrestled with God, has received acceptance from God and from man Esau, has enjoyed shalom. Things are going great for him. Can you see it, dearly beloved? The peaceful existence. Finally, 20 years, 20 long years of fear and oppression. And where is he now? On a rocking chair on the front porch of All Is Good. So even this story is slippery. As we approach it, it requires some interpretation. One thing that we cannot ignore is its place in Jacob's life. Let me illustrate it for you. Have you ever heard of the Hahn Beer Company? They have a wonderful commercial. It's beautiful music playing in the backdrop. A woman walking to a hot tub in a beautiful restroom, looks decked out, remodeled, fancy, modern. Suds in the hot tub soaking. She gets in the water, everything. She lays back, it's peaceful. And then out of nowhere, her husband runs and does a cannonball into the water and splashes water everywhere. That's what happens next. A neutron bomb dropped in the lap of Jacob while he's experienced the most peace he's ever had in his life. So what's our outline in light of that introduction, dearly beloved? An unassuming outing and a grotesque grab, verses 1 through 4. A Band-Aid over a bullet wound, verses 5 through 12. Foreskins and dark sins, verses 13 through 31. And point number 4, divine direction and cleaning house, chapter 35, verses 1 through 8. So let's take our first point, an unassuming outing and a grotesque grab. Now, dearly beloved, we're not left in the dark how to take this story. One commentator has demonstrated that the entirety of the Jacob narratives is one long chiastic structure. Let me show it to you. You see A at the top and then A prime at the bottom. Struggle at birth and birthright, and then it ends with blessing and struggle at birth, and that's when Rachel gives birth to Benjamin and dies. And then B and B prime is the one we're looking at today, chapter 26, verses 1 through 35, was deception and strife with the Philistines. That's when Isaac lied to Abimelech about Rebekah being his sister when she was actually his wife. And then B prime, which is what we're looking at today, deception and strife with the Hivites. And then if you look at the centermost core, F and F prime, birth of children and birth of herds. The centermost point of Jacob's life is how he is enriched by God because he's the one that has the blessing from his father Isaac, and then God will later bless him. This is the main structure, and it shows us where we've been and it shows us where we're heading. The Jacob narratives are about to shift gears and focus on his children, and in particular his son Joseph. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to ground this passage. And the story of Genesis 26 of Isaac, Jacob's dad, grounds it for us based on this structure. They're opposites. There was a famine in the land, beside the famine that Abraham had experienced decades earlier. So Isaac went to Gerar. This is Jacob's dad, Isaac, in chapter 26, went to Gerar in the territory of the Philistines. Yahweh appeared to him and warned him not to go to Egypt. So he did what God told him, and he hung around Gerar. And God promised him that he'd be okay. But what happens? The men of Gerar ask him about his gracious and lovely wife, Rebekah, even though we know she's manipulative. And Abraham's old DNA jumps out, and Isaac says, because his old dad's DNA is in him, she's my sister, out of fear. He was scared. And even though God had just spoken to him, fear was already in his heart. Abimelech saw one day Isaac and Rebekah were getting, quote, frisky. That's PG. Keep it PG in here. And Abimelech called him to the carpet, and he said, quote, behold, she is certainly your wife. Calls him out for lying. Abimelech continues, what is this that you have done to us? One of the people might have easily slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech commanded all the people, saying, he who touches this man or his wife will certainly be put to death. And this gave Isaac a peaceful life in the land. But because he was rich and because God was with him, whatever he did prospers. And it did prosper. He dug wells and struck water every time. And then the Philistines would quarrel over the wells, and he would move on and do it again. He went around and redug the wells of his father Abraham as Abraham had previously dug in the Philistine territory. And the Philistines were pleased to stop up this important water source to their own detriment, just as long as these pesky Shemites would not be able to get it. Over and over, Isaac dug wells. He never fought back. He just stayed quiet and moved on. Finally, after digging up a well, they did not quarrel with him. Then God appears to him and blesses him. So he built an altar there, pitched his tent, and his servants dug another well. Now Abimelech, from the background, is seeing all of this. And he sees that Isaac was strong and blessed and that God was with him. So he came with his military and his right-hand man, and he made a covenant with Isaac, and they went away in peace, in shalom. Then the episode ends with, on that same day, that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug and said to him, we have found water. That's the gist of chapter 26. Did you pick up the similarities? Let me bring this to a finer point. In Genesis 26 and then Genesis 34, what we're looking at today, we have intertextual links that help us understand the chapter we're in. So even though it was slippery, we have a foundation for how to understand it. Both stories in chapter 26 and in 34 concern deception and strife and a pact with foreign rulers. Isaac deceives the people of Gerar. Jacob's sons deceive the Hivites. We have both stories have strife, wells, and the strife with Dinah. Isaac in the covenant with Abimelech and the people of Gerar, and then in chapter 34, Jacob's sons and the pact with the Hivites to be circumcised and to intermarry. Both have to do with marriage in some way or another. Isaac was married to Rebekah but lied and she could have been violated. Shechem wanted to marry Dinah after he violated her. And more than that, Genesis 26 and chapter 34 that we're looking at today share a ton of vocabulary. The word brother, the word sister, the word to multiply, the word to kill, one people, flock, the word to make space, rahav, the word to lie. In an interesting observation, the word to lie with another person, that in both instances involves an uncircumcised male. The word property, there's a play on words with the word property, ahuzat, and the word ahazu, property, and the word ahuzat, the right hand of Abimelech. The word sister, again, the word with our daughters. There's a play on word there. In chapter 26, verse 28, it's the word between us. Let us make a covenant between us. It's benotenu. And then with our daughters, benotenu. There's a play on words there. The word shalom, peace or friendliness, occurs in chapter 26 and in chapter 34. All of these words are shared between these two chapters. It's not an accident. In light of the shared vocabulary between these two stories, one commentator writes, quote, "In both incidents, the patriarch in question comes off less than heroic, unwilling as each is to protect the wife or daughter. The two chapters, Genesis 26 and 34, are therefore balanced accounts, both dealing with deception, one for self-preservation and perpetrated by Jacob's father, the other for revenge by Jacob's sons, and both deceptions are deprecated, that is, presented in a way that requires disapproval," end quote. So, chapter 26 gives us the foundation to understand chapter 34. It was a negative story in 26, therefore this must be a negative story in 34, with Jacob's behavior, with his son's behavior, with all of their behavior. This is how we can understand this story, dearly beloved. It's not good. It's really terrible. And it is truly a cannonball into the serene ending we just came from. So let's take our first point, an unassuming outing, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. In the show, I like true crime genre, and one of my favorite shows is The First 48. And there's an episode of this young girl who didn't have a car, so she had to leave her apartment at 5 a.m. and walk like 20 blocks to get to the place where she was a laborer on a job, and they would bus them to the job, but she had to get to the labor place. So she would walk 20 blocks at 5 a.m. to get there. And one day she didn't make it. Someone found her on the way, and they brutally murdered her. The detectives that worked the case to this day is unsolved. And the detective, when they were interviewing him in this episode, and he's holding back tears, and he says, "I can't explain it. I can't. But sometimes, for whatever reason, evil, true evil, on some days just visits people," unquote. Here's Dinah, Leah's daughter, the brother's little sister, Jacob's only baby girl. Can we impugn her character? Why is she out there, quote, visiting the daughters of Canaan? Was she captured by the allure of the Canaanite way of life, the culture, the shiny things, the bells and the whistles of city life? You know, the translation is a little ambiguous here. The text says that she went out, quote, to see the daughters of the land. And here, the New American Standard 95 version says to visit the daughters of the land. The idea can mean to visit, but I think she is youthfully naive and wanted to see what the Canaanite women were like. All she knows is life on a farm, as it were. Remember, her life was marked by a father who spent his days in animal husbandry. Laban's compound was near Padam Aram, and though city life was surely there, it was far enough away to warrant a different way of life. This was Canaan. Canaanite culture, though very similar, was probably different enough that it warranted some curiosity. I think that may be the best way to take Dinah here. You know, some have indicted her for worldliness, suggesting that Jacob didn't do a good job raising her, and thus she was whisked away by the Canaanite world. You know, the narrator never tells us what she thinks. No words are uttered by her in this narrative. We can simply deduce that she was curious and went out to see what the what's were. And it was a bad idea. Dearly beloved, this is where the youth of today ought to trust their parents a bit more. Many young people go astray because they want to, quote, see for themselves. Even after their parents have asked them to trust their parents' wisdom, many young people don't want to learn through obedience. But when the sharp bite of pain enters their world, it's often too late. Some things that are done can never be undone. And that's what we see here. Thus the text says in verse 1, she went out. An ominous phrase as, quote, went out will set up each scene in this narrative. She went out. What happened when she went out, dearly beloved? A grotesque grab, verse 2. Here's Shechem. When Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force. Who could they be? Who is this Shechem and the son of Hamor? Who are they? These are the very land barons Jacob bought the land from a few verses earlier. In chapter 39, verse 19 says, he bought the plot of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. They're not strangers. The naming of these men earlier in verse 19 that I just read was leading us into the story. They own land, as we'll see. Oh, Shechem is a prince of the land. That means he has authority, status. He's a somebody. And somebodies always feel like they're entitled to anybody. Oh, what a grotesque man, immoral, wicked, vile. This kind of man is the superlative of evil. You know, some might object and say, well, it was a patriarchal society and women had no rights and she was just as much a victim of the society as she was his victim. Maybe, but notice that is not how her brothers understood the issue. Later in verse 7, they will say, the narrator will tell us, now the sons of Jacob came in from the field where they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. In other words, there was enough of a moral compass in that day to know that what he had done was wicked, dearly beloved. And the text says, quote, he took her and lay with her by force. And the term force is in the pio conjugation. It's a Hebrew verb conjugation that can denote intensity of the normal meaning of the lexical idea of that verb. For example, the normal meaning of the verb to break something, when you put it in the pio conjugation, it raises the intensity and it means to shatter the thing to pieces. So think about that. The normal meaning of the word for in the cow stem here for the word to lay with her by force, right? It's to be emaciated or hunched over as one who is before another who can hurt them. But in the pio, it means to be forced into oppression, to be forced into something. It's oppressiveness. Same word in the pio is used in Exodus 1:1 for the affliction the Egyptians placed on the Israelites. But in this context of lying with someone in a sexual way, it means rape. She was forcefully taken by this grotesque grabber, and he took her and he lay with her by force. This is heartbreaking. Her naivete has set some things in motion that can never be undone. She has done what seemed to be an unassuming thing, going out to see the women of Canaanite culture, and Shechem sees her, grabs her, rapes her. What happens next? Doting on a desecrated daughter. Look at the mind of wickedness. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. Dearly beloved, notice how the mind of perverseness works. This is, to me, really remarkable to read, and I don't mean it in a nice way. It's slippery. Did he not love her? Did he love her? Was he so enamored with her that they locked eyes and kissed? And tender music was playing in the background? That's how he sees it. I have no doubt that that is what he's thinking. Don't rush out to view this movie. But it's a movie placed in medieval times called The Last Duel. Ladies, don't swoon, but that fella Adam Driver, who some of you think is God's gift to man, is in it. He was in Star Wars, something or other. It has to do with a woman who was raped, and the movie told the story from the perspective of the woman. And then it switched, and it told the story from the perspective of the man who claimed to be innocent. And then it switched, and I think, if I recall correctly, it told the perspective of her husband who believed his wife but had doubts. And the idea was that they were to duel because they couldn't agree. And the winner of the duel would be the one who was believed. If the rapist won, the woman would be put to death and her husband would be dead. If the husband won, the wife would be spared and the rapist would be killed and justice would have been done. Now, Adam Driver was the rapist in the movie. And when he tells the story from his perspective, he's innocent. Oh my goodness, she made eyes at him. She was the instigator. And in his own mind, he was right. Now, again, I don't recommend you rush out and see the film. It has an R rating, mostly because of the content. So it is for a mature audience, but ultimately the story that was told in this movie was very sobering, dearly beloved. How the rapist thought was the thrust of the movie. How they portrayed his side of things is how I think Shechem is thinking here. Notice the narrator's words. He was deeply attracted to her. You know, the Hebrew says that more literal was his nephesh. His soul clung to her, which is a lot stronger than he was deeply attracted. In his mind, they were one. They were glued together. You'll remember, through rape, not matrimony. He is sick. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, the guy we just sold the land to, hey, we did him a favor. Surely he'll be agreeable to keeping his daughter with me, right? Right? And lastly, the narrator says, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. You know, you find three words in this. The word daughters, the word took, and the word saw. You know what they remind me of? Genesis 6. The sons of God saw the daughters of man and took for themselves. These linking words give the story the negative hue it deserves. It conjures trouble that demands a reckoning, and one will come. The mindset in verse 3, he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. You know, we have a modern day example of this, a sad, sad example. I have his books on my shelf to this day, and some people have encouraged me to turn the spine inward where you can't see the name anymore. And I'm speaking of none other than Ravi Zacharias. You know, Ravi Zacharias was long on philosophy, but short on scripture. That's how one preacher characterized him. Now, I'm not going to preach Ravi into hell because that's between him and God, and he did express faith in God, but he was a conflicted man. Oh, dearly beloved, he was a conflicted man, and his legacy has been tarnished by grotesque sin. He had somehow stake in a massage parlor, and he would go to these massage parlor that he partly owned, and he would have these women because no one would believe them. He's a Christian personality that has a 300 a year traveling schedule, is world renowned. Everyone knows him. No one will believe me that he was just imposing himself on me. He's accused of rape. And there's stories that came forward that said that when he would do this, that he would ask them to pray with him. Think about that. He just molested them. He just had them do grotesque acts upon him. And then afterwards, he would ask them to pray with him. It's Shechem. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, and he loved her, and he spoke tenderly to her after she was raped. That's what this feels like. He just raped her. Oh, but he loved her, spoke tenderly. I can think of a million other places she'd rather be than in the same room with this guy. What hubris, what distorted perversion. So as a prince of the land, what does he do next? Dad, fix what I've done. That's what he does next. Verse 4. So Shechem spoke to his father, Hamor, saying, get me this young girl for a wife. You know, dearly beloved, have you ever seen something so out of order that the only way forward is to get someone else to fix the issue for you? I'm putting it mildly. This guy is out of order. It's incredible. Am I to replay this little scenario? There's Dinah, beautiful, comely like Aunt Rachel, walking through the town square, observing the vibrant colors, the clothing the women are wearing, their jewelry, their braids in their hair, their dress, and how they go about their day, their perfumes, that wonderful nard wafting in the air, spices, the marketplace, walking with a naive look on her face. She has left her father's compound, which is safe, and all she needs for her life is there, but nonetheless, there she is, and Shechem, happening along, sees her. The narrator doesn't tell us that he said anything to her. There's no recording of formalities. Hi, how are you doing? What's your name? Can I have your Instagram? And back in my day, we'd say, put your phone number in this here. Our old Primeco or Nextel phone. Some of you are old enough to remember those. But there's none of that. He simply moves to the issue. He saw her, he took her, and he laid with her by force. Dearly beloved, that's all the narrator tells us. Shechem raped her. Then he realized his soul was tied to hers, and he loved her. And then after raping her, he speaks tenderly to her. Then reality really sets in. Uh-oh, what's next? I have a grand idea. Dad, get me this young girl for a wife, would you? Notice what he doesn't say, dearly beloved. He doesn't say, hey, get me Dinah for a wife. He doesn't even use her name. Is this for her? No, it's all for him. He loved her for his sake. He spoke tenderly to her for his sake. He was in love with what he has just broken. He's out of order, and he's figuring out right now that the only way he can move forward with his little prize is to call on dear old dad. And what we have is a young lady who he has just violated in one of the most horrific ways, and he yells, Dad, fix what I have done. It brings me to my second point, a Band-Aid over a bullet wound, verses 5 through 12. Is it wisdom or withdrawal in verse 5? This is where it gets a bit slippery for our protagonist, Jacob. Is Jacob using wisdom here or withdrawing from his responsibilities? Let's look at verse 5, shall we? Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. Now we aren't told who told Jacob. No, the narrator doesn't tell us who told him, but word got to him. And this gives us a clue that Dinah may not have traveled out of her father's compound alone. She may have had some servants with her. They may have come in immediately and told Jacob what had happened. But by the time word reached Jacob's ears, the deed was done. And the boys, Jacob's 11 sons in the field with the livestock, word won't reach them. They'll come in and learn of it. But in the meanwhile, Jacob doesn't act. The text says he kept silent until they came in. Now, based on the parallel story of Genesis 26, we have to view this inaction with a negative light. Jacob, just having survived his strenuous ordeal with Laban, then at the first scary reunion with Esau, has turned out in his favor. He's just lived for a time in the hills with his brother, living the good life, peaceful, all is as it should be. And then this neutron bomb has just blown up in his lap. I don't see Jacob having the emotional capital to handle something like this at this moment. He seemingly forgets who's with him. God is with him. The need for inaction was to me, his need to be inactive and to keep quiet was just wrong-headed. You know, in this text, Jacob is mentioned 11 times in the narrative, but he only speaks at the very end. And his speech has to do with how he will be viewed by the people in the land. His daughter just got raped. One commentator writes, quote, Jacob himself remained silent throughout most of the narrative, except for an irate protest of his son's violent enterprises. He seems suspiciously apathetic, demonstrating a total lack of concern for his daughter, being worried only about his status in Canaanite country. This from a man who, in previous incidents, was never at a loss for words. He is named 11 times in Genesis 34, but speaks only once, unquote. So he waits. Maybe it's wisdom or maybe it's withdrawal. Maybe wisdom and withdrawal is a false dichotomy. Maybe he's simply indecisive. Maybe he's being strategic, or more accurately, maybe he's being withdrawn. By mentioning his name so many times and by saying that he remains silent, which is new for his character, his silence indicts him here. Jacob doesn't act. And word has just reached him that his daughter has just been raped. Further, what is the one question you would be asking right now, dearly beloved? Well, where is she? Where's my baby girl? He doesn't say anything. An apathetic father in the face of extreme adversity and evil is the worst kind of father to be in that very moment. Even Hamor, Shechem's dad, seems to be more of a dad than Jacob. Notice what he does. And it's the precursor to a coming conflict, verses 6 through 7. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Hamor goes into the fray, directly to the victim's dad, straight to the source of what could be a solution or a deadly skirmish. In verse 7, now the sons of Jacob came in from the field, and when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. This is hard. What did they hear when they heard it? New American Standard supplies the word it. It really should read, when they heard, and the men were grieved. Heard what? What happened to their baby sister? Notice the stages of emotion. The men were grieved. The word grieved is to feel hurt, to be deeply worried, to have feelings of deep hurt. It is often experienced when a person loses something extremely important. People feel grieved when their partner betrays them. People feel grieved when their children depart from the righteous path. People feel grieved when a loved one dies. No less when they die in a sudden or tragic instance. People are grieved when someone is raped. In each instance, something is lost. They experience a loss, the loss of innocence of their baby sister, how she was oppressed by Shechem, oh, rapist in chief Shechem, how the depravity of that act has made its way upon their front porch. They didn't ask for this. They were living peaceably on the land, minding their animals and minding their business. And here's the explosion of a detestable thing in their midst. Evil visited their baby sister that day, and now the perpetrator is at their door. They were grieved. And what's the next stage after that emotion? Verse 7, and they were very angry. Grief turns to anger. They're enraged. This is righteous anger. How do I know that their anger has not yet raised to the sin of anger? Because the narrator tells us, quote, they became angry because, and what that important word because what? Because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done, end quote. That's why they were angry. They were rightly grieved, and that grief rightly and righteously turned to anger because he had done a detestable, disgraceful thing. This was an abomination. They were white hot with fury and righteous anger. I think they're just getting their bearings over the situation when Hamor speaks. I think Hamor is trying to bring about the best solution for both parties without it leading to a military conflict. So what does he propose? He proposes a Band-Aid over a bullet wound, dearly beloved. But Hamor spoke to them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us. Take our daughters for yourselves. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it and acquire property in it. Verse 8. Notice what he says. The soul, the nephesh of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Isn't it a little late for that? Really, is this this is the epitome of putting the cart before the horse? Worse, in marriage, as a general rule, the woman isn't raped. It's just my observation. But that's his proposition. Let's smooth this whole thing over with a wedding feast. Amen? Let me ask you a question, dearly beloved. Where's Dinah? Where's Dinah? Is Dinah back with her family? Is she being checked on by the family attendants who could put a salve on her hurting heart? Is she in the presence of her loved ones? Is she in Leah's arms being soothed after so violent a thing? No, they still have her. And we learn later in verse 26 that she is still at Shechem's house. Evidence that this negotiation is a farce, trying to place a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. Verse 9 has more negotiating. Intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. Hey, let's merge our peoples. Let this be the beginning of something new. Why create strife and hostility? Am I right? Let's turn this negative into a positive. Let's just all be related through marriage. It will give us an alliance, and we'd make merry in the land. He sweetens the pot in verse 10. The land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it. Acquire property in it. But dearly beloved, they've already done that. The way Jacob bought the land earlier wasn't anything like Abraham, who had to barter and go back and forth to buy the burial plot at the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah in it. He had to overpay for that parcel of land, 400 shekels of silver commercial standard. And here it says Jacob paid 100 pieces of money, and the tractate was large. How do I know it was large? Because it was large enough to have all his flocks in the land. And based on the amount of the animals that he gave to Esau, Jacob's wealth was enormous. You know, Esau tried to refuse and said, I have much. And Jacob replied with, well, I have it all. He was rich, as the young kids say. So verse 10 seems weak coming from Hamor. the land, trade in it and acquire property. They've already done that. This is weak sauce. But then, the rapist in chief speaks. Verses 11 through 12. Shechem also said to her father and brothers, if I find favor in your sight, then I will give you whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so bridal payment and gift, and I will give according as you say to me, but give me the girl in marriage. Shechem adds his 2 cents. If there was ever a time that be quiet is a thing, this is it. But no, he feels like he has something to add. If I find favor in your eyes, notice the word in his eyes. He saw Dinah when she went to look with her eyes at the daughters of the land. And then he brought this heinous thing into action. And now the rapist in chief is asking for grace, the word hain, grace, in their eyes. What hubris. And then what? He continues, and then I will give whatever you say to me. And he's willing to pay the bridal price. Isn't that dad's job? He could have kept quiet and let Hamor speak on his behalf, but no, he intrudes. He's desperate. He, quote, loves her. His soul is tied, cleaved to hers. They're united. He isn't taking any chances. Money, I have it. Ask anything, I will give it. Never mind that I raped your sister and now want to keep her as my plaything. I really love her, I'll pay anything you ask. I will. Just ask and it's yours. But just give me the girl in marriage. And notice, dearly beloved, not give me Dinah in marriage. I'm wondering if he even knows her name at this point. Both instances, when he speaks, he only calls her the girl. First, when he spoke with his father in verse 4, give me the young girl as a wife. And now here in verse 12, but give me the girl in marriage. He never names her. Thus, the negotiations have begun. The Hivites are trying to put a Band-Aid over a bullet wound. And what happens, Lex? And these 2 points will be done. I know I'm a little over. I'm sorry. A premeditation and a sacrilegious solution. Premeditation and a sacrilegious solution. Verses 13 through 17. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. They said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to the one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace from us. They answered with deceit. A man in New York City met and married a wife who had a cat. Actually, the cat had her. She loved the cat. She stroked it, combed its fur, fed it, and pampered it. The man detested the cat. He was allergic to cat hair. He hated the smell of the litter box. He couldn't stand the scratching on the furniture, and he couldn't get a good night's sleep because the cat kept jumping on the bed. When his wife was out of town for the weekend, he put the cat in a bag with some rocks, dumped it in the Hudson River, and uttered a joyful goodbye to the cat. When his wife returned and could not find the cat, she was overwhelmed with grief. Her husband said, look, honey, I know how much the cat meant to you. I'm going to put an ad in the paper and give a reward of $500 to anyone who finds the cat. No cat showed up. So a few days later, he said, honey, you mean more to me than anything else on earth. If that cat is so precious to you, it is precious to me. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll buy another ad and raise the ante. We'll increase the reward to $1,000. A friend saw the ad and exclaimed, you must be nuts. There isn't a cat on earth that is worth $1,000. And the man replied, well, when you know what I know, you can't afford to be generous. You can afford to be generous. When you know what the Israelites know, what do they know? Dearly beloved, they know that their righteous anger has festered into premeditation. Murder is on the horizon. Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. So they lie. Only on this condition will consent to you. If you will become like us in that every male of you be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and grow. That's it. You get circumcised and everything's good, right? This is a sacrilegious solution. Why is it sacrilegious? Dearly beloved, what is circumcision? Circumcision is the sign of the Abrahamic covenant, and the Abrahamic covenant promised that Abraham's line would be a blessing to all the families of the world. And they're taking this covenant sign that God is going to promise the world through this bloodline. And they're taking that sign of circumcision and using it as the motive or the device to kill these men. They're taking a religious, a sacred thing and turning it into a tool for murder. And it's premeditated. Look at what it says. The narrator tells us that they answered them with deceit in verse 13. So what do the Hivites do? We just got out of a war. We just got out of a bad situation. All we got to do is sell this to our people. So they're going to sell the solution, and in selling the solution, they're going to seal their fate. Now, the words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now, he was more respected in all the household of his father. He's a somebody, you see. So Hamor and his son Shechem, you see, they're looking like, again, this text is slippery. They're looking like they're not that bad. He just raped Dinah, but he really loved her. But man, pay attention when the narrator gives you their words. And you see who they really are. I like telling people, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. And the narrator is going to show us who they are. Notice how they sell it. Verse 20, so Hamor and his son, they came to the gate of their city, spoke to the city, and this is what they said, verse 21. These men are friendly with us. Why are they friendly? They just agreed to do this even though my son raped their daughter. Therefore, let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will these men consent to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. And then here's what they speak. Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? Aha. There's a motive here. You know, when we were looking for a house to move here a year and a half ago, and we were going through websites, and realtors are sending us these listings on Zillow and on whatever the websites are, and these places that we could afford were beautiful. And then our realtor would go to them because we were in Texas, and she'd FaceTime us, and she says, "You don't want this place." Like, what's going on here? Photoshop. It was Photoshop. The pictures of the listings, they Photoshopped them and make the paint look neat, everything look clear. They put furniture that looks like it's really in there, but it's not. And the dinginess is gone. Everything's cleaned up and bright, and none of it looks that way. So we're grateful for our realtor that went and FaceTimed us and saw it in person, but it's really hard to buy something from Texas, especially when, Texas is God's country. And then when we put our house for sale, there was a drought in Texas. And our beautiful, lush land, the grass was dead. And our realtor photoshopped bright green grass in the pictures. I said, take it down. I don't want to be like what I just complained about. Oh, everybody does it, but not us. She didn't listen. We tried. We wanted to be above board, but she was like, they don't care. I was like, well, we do. Anyway, what the point is that you make something look better than it is. That's what he's doing here. He's making the deal look better than it is. How? We can have their stuff. Do you remember when Jacob and his family came over the horizon with all of those flocks and all of those tents and all of that wealth came to us, and we wanted to get to know them, and they pitched their tent, so we sold them the land that they were on? All of that could be ours. But just one little thing. You got to cut off your foreskin. That's all. Verse 24. All who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of his city, they listened. They sowed the solution and they sealed their fate. What happens next? Well, you have to tune in next week for the rest of the story. We'll pick this up next week. So we looked at A Vignette of Vengeance, Part 1, an unassuming outing and a grotesque grab, a Band-Aid over a bullet wound, foreskins and dark sins. The dark sins are coming up in verses 25 through 31. And then the week after that, we'll look at divine direction and cleaning house. Well, so what? How can we apply this today? Dearly beloved, we live in a broken world. We do. And there's at least 4 lessons that I think we can draw from what we read so far. The first one is, dearly beloved, sometimes evil visits God's people. I read a sad story of Christians in Africa that are the most oppressed. They get martyred more than any other Christians in the world. Evil just visits God's people sometimes. Evil visited Dinah this day. The second thing I'd like to point our attention to is for us today, how do we cross that bridge from then to now, and what do we do about it? The reality is grief and anger can be righteous, but justice must be derived from the appropriate channels. And nowhere in this text did Jacob seek God's face for justice. He didn't go through the appropriate channel for justice. And you know what? Next week you're going to see, neither did his sons. So grief and anger can be righteous, but dearly beloved, justice must be derived from the appropriate channels. Number 3, withdrawing from the hard things is always a bad idea. Withdrawing from the hard things is always a bad idea. Jacob withdraws. Fathers in here, never withdraw from the hard things. Face them. Trust God with them. Do you know how the difference between the buffalo and the cow when a storm comes? The buffalo the herd runs right into the storm, and they get beyond it quicker, but the cows run from it and stay in it longer because they ran from it. Be like the buffalo. And number 4, and this goes without saying, don't be a Shechem or a Hamor. Don't be a Shechem or a Hamor. Let's pray. Father, we love you. We thank you for this text. We thank you for even the hard sayings in the Bible where we read something that's devastating and that's wicked. The inaction of a father of a raped daughter. The perverse mind of a rapist who thinks he's in love. The father of a rapist who thinks he can mend the pain by offering a solution that is really quite silly. There are no heroes in this text. But next week we'll see that you are the hero. And that when you show up, things can be made right. So Lord, for any in here that have suffered, for any in here where evil has probably visited them, or where they're facing something hard, as we'll see next week, Lord, you're in it. Help us to trust you. Help us to move forward loving you. Even when we don't understand. I'm fond of saying, if you know him, you don't need to know why. Lord, we thank you for your goodness, even in the midst of trouble. It is in your precious and magnificent name, Jesus, who we pray, and by the power of the Holy Spirit. And all of God's children said, please stand for the last song.